From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
The U.S. bishops have just concluded their annual fall assembly in Baltimore. The recently completed Synod on Synodality and the U.S. elections gave the bishops much to talk about, from how to put synodality into action to examining the opportunities and potential challenges of a second Trump administration. The Register's editor-in-chief, Shannon Mullen, and senior editor, Jonathan Liedl, were on the ground in Baltimore, and today they bring us a recap of important takeaways. Then, like last week's show, we turn again to teasing out the 2024 election results. This time we talk about Congress, state amendments, and how President-elect Trump is already laying the groundwork for his administration. I'm Jeanette DeMello, host of Register Radio. I'm together with Matthew Bunson, my co-host, and EWTN News' vice president and editorial director. Matthew, you were on the ground in Baltimore as the U.S. bishops met in their plenary assembly or session this week.
That's right.
That's right, and you were there with Shannon, and now you're together in the studio in Washington, which is perfect. So I'm going to pitch this to you right now.
Well, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it was seemingly, when you saw the agenda, it didn't look all that packed, and yet, as often is the case with the U.S. bishops, they managed to fill the time nicely, and even had some side and I think very important press conferences. But top of mind, immigration. We have a Catholic convert as a new vice president, and J.D. Vance. We have the implementation of the Synod. We have elections for leadership. And, of course, a focus on Pope Francis's newest encyclical, Dilexit Nos. And then, of course, there's the political reality of a second Trump administration. So to help us talk about all of that, as you just mentioned, we have Shannon Mullen and Jonathan Liedl, both keen observers of the USCCB, and both of them, as you mentioned, also on the ground in Baltimore. Good morning.
Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning.
So, Jonathan, let's start with you. You wrote very helpful analysis about some takeaways, and, of course, those points will come to light in the course of this conversation, but let's not give the whole thing away. But what was your biggest takeaway?
I think one of the biggest overarching takeaways, Matthew, is that really the agenda and the tenor of the conversation and what the bishops were focusing on was really shaped and overshadowed by two people who weren't in the room, right? And that would be Pope Francis and President-elect Donald Trump. Because as you pointed out, the meeting started less than a week after the presidential elections last week. It started a couple of weeks after the conclusion of the Synod on Synodality in Rome, Pope Francis's signature event. So really, I would say through the lens of those two figures, you could really take a look at a lot of the issues, the items, the agendas that were being discussed. The bishops very, and we'll get into this a bit more, but seemed very, very keen and prepped in a way to anticipate the challenges and opportunities coming with a Trump presidency. And I think we're very strategic. And for instance, the press conference that wasn't on the initial agenda with some conference leadership speaking about what a Trump presidency might represent. And then also, I think Pope Francis, really, it's funny because we talk sometimes, some people do, about the USCCB sort of not seeing eye to eye with the Pope. But if you take a look at this agenda, from the Synod on Synodality, from the new encyclical on the Sacred Heart Dilexit Nos, as you mentioned, Matthew, but then things like Laudato Si and Dignitatis Infinita and other really important documents that have come from this papacy. It was really a USCCB meeting, I would say, defined by those two people, Pope Francis and President-elect Donald Trump.
Yeah, and for the record, your piece at ncregister.com is under the title of What the USCCB Meeting Said About U.S. Bishops, Pope Francis, and Donald Trump. But Shannon, obviously the election was a pretty huge issue, and even if it was not necessarily on the agenda, but what did the bishops do to address this, GOP elephant in the room?
Yeah, it's interesting. Jonathan said in his piece that the bishops seemed very well prepared. And I'm sure they had two sets of scripts,
yes.
Right? And that was interesting because obviously a Kamala Harris victory would have presented them with a whole different set of issues. Obviously the abortion issue, but conscientious objections, religious liberty issues, and transgender, the agenda, and so forth. And so that didn't happen. So they are presented with some obvious tension points, potential tension points. The big one is migration, and they did address that. Jonathan described it as pointed but measured in how they addressed it. They
Very much wait and see.
Yeah, wait and see. Some strong wording, about human dignity. But as Bishop cites, the chair of the migration committee said, we don't want to get ahead of the administration until they see some concrete proposals.
Yeah, and is there a sense, too, that they were at some pains to point out Catholic social teaching that governments have a right to regulate migration, defend their borders, but at the same time then always coming back to human dignity?
Yeah, I think it was also Bishop Seitz who said this is a test for our nation. Obviously, no one disagrees that the immigration system that we have in the United States is horribly dysfunctional and has been for decades and needs to be reformed. But how they implement this very popular policy of deporting illegal, undocumented immigrants, beginning, I think, with those who have criminal convictions and have issues of that nature. So it is a test. It's a test of the nation. It's also a test of the bishops and how much influence they'll have. I think the Bishop Burbidge said that they feel that they'll have an open ear with the Trump administration on some of these issues. So we'll see.
Yeah, and IVF, I know, also came up as a topic.
Yeah, they made the distinction. We've heard a lot of rhetoric during the campaign about IVF and other issues. Let's see what that concrete proposals really amount to.
Right, and in talking with some of the bishops, I have the impression that they're pretty confident there would be a lot of carve-outs and obviously conscience protections and other things.
Right, yeah.
I want to jump in here. I don't know if this is a great question for Shannon or for Jonathan, so you can scramble. But, we have to also, the bishops have to also deal with the reality of a Catholic vice president. And this is an interesting one, a convert in J.D. Vance. So what were there conversations about that or how they might reach out or connect with the vice president?
I can jump in here just because I did talk to Bishop Burbidge, who's the chair of the pro-life committee, Bishop of the Diocese of Arlington, after the press conference, and asked him specifically about this. And he didn't say Vance's name specifically, explicitly when he responded, but he said, the bishops, their job as pastors is to teach and to inform. And he said, especially, when a politician belongs to their flock, right? So he implied, right, that they will be making that effort, and he said, and he has a hope, right, that as we've said, that the administration, or perhaps alluding to J.D. Vance specifically, would be open to the bishop's instruction, the bishop's putting forth the Catholic perspective, which of course is not just true for Catholics, but is true for all people, and it's not just true because of revelation or something specific for Catholics, but because of the natural law. So there definitely is work to be done there. Another bishop mentioned to me that they need to be reaching out to J.D. Vance. Like, that needs to be kind of a priority, because in this administration, especially with Trump showing some distance from the pro-life movement, I think in this term compared to his first term, a connection with Vance, a working relationship with Vance may be absolutely imperative for the bishops to have that influence.
That's right. So you're listening to Register Radio. We've been talking about the U.S. bishops meeting that just concluded with Shannon Mullen and Jonathan Liedl and Matthew Bunson, all of whom were there, and so. But we can't leave this conversation without talking a bit more about the synod and how the recently concluded synod impacted this discussion. So, Jonathan, I think you wrote about that particularly, that and you said in the beginning of this conversation that Pope Francis was very much present, even though he was not physically present, in part because of the synod discussion. So how did the synod and that implementation come into the U.S. bishops' meeting?
Yeah, so actually, I would say even before the meeting started, you had certain cardinals, actually, that Pope Francis has created, Cardinal McElroy, Cardinal Cupich, sort of publicly lobbying for the creation of a USCCB committee on synodality. So when the meeting started, that was an agenda item, was discussing the synod on synodality. So what do we see pushback on that? What do we see a proposal? But instead of a committee, what we saw was a proposal from the floor to create a task force. To create a kind of a smaller, less well-funded group to look at how to implement this in the USCCB and in the U.S. going forward. So I think that's a really clear instance of, controversial issues, if you will, getting solved by the bishops in the closed-door sessions that they have now, so that when they come out in public, they can be more united. But I think overall, we heard from Bishop Daniel Flores and Archbishop William Lori of Brownsville and Baltimore, respectively, who were both at the Synod in Rome. And the emphasis, it seems to me, is that, synodality, the U.S. bishops are seeing, it's about authentic listening. That begins with the conversion of the heart, right? Mm-hmm. You can add all the structures in the world, you can add all the consultative bodies you want, but if you don't have people who are genuinely formed and moved to listen first to the Holy Spirit, and then also to each other, then synodality is going to fall flat. So that really seemed to be the emphasis that those bishops were putting forward. So structures might be a part of it, but and another point is, during the final week of the synod, or not in the middle of it actually, Dilexit Nos, this encyclical, only the fourth encyclical of Francis's pontificate on the Sacred Heart of Jesus was released. And Bishop Flores really underscored that is really the key to understanding synodality, is to understand the Sacred Heart of Jesus, mm-hmm. understand the need for authentic encounter with Christ and with the other, to listen, to understand, and to move forward.
And that was one of the points that the Apostolic Nuncio Cardinal Pierre was making too, wasn't it?
Yes, in his opening speech, it was actually really, I'd be curious to hear Shannon's thoughts too, but he kind of said a lot has happened over the past year, and really the Sacred Heart of Jesus, that Pope Francis highlighted in this encyclical, is a thread for helping us understand the National Eucharistic Congress, right? Because the Eucharist is where we encounter Christ. And then for understanding the Synod on synodality, right? Like the need to listen to each other, to engage in authentic communion, and then also the Jubilee year upcoming as well. So that was really kind of maybe an overarching thread of the whole USCCB meeting, mm-hmm. Was the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Well, you asked, you wanted to hear Shannon's thoughts on that. Shannon, do you have any concluding thoughts on just the whole tenor of that meeting?
Yeah, I would just quickly add on Cardinal Pierre. He also linked all this, kind of tied everything together with the National Eucharistic Revival, which just concluded the Congress over the summer. And the major emphasis of that, as it ended, was that we've had this encounter with the Eucharistic Lord. Now it's a mission, and we're called to engage with our neighbors, including those we may disagree with politically and otherwise. So that was very interesting, and that speech came in the beginning of the public session, and I think set a tone which was very pastoral and mm-hmm. and pretty harmonious, right? Wouldn't you say, Matthew?
Yeah, I would. And the bishops seemed to be very much aware of the relationship with Pope Francis and went out of their way to talk about that. And I think the nuncio is picking up on that.
Yeah, I just really appreciated Jonathan's piece, the one that we mentioned at the beginning of the show, what the U.S. bishops meeting said about the U.S. bishops, Pope Francis, and Donald Trump. It really honed in on some of these things you're talking about. And one of the things that really struck me, and I think it's bringing in this synodality, is that in their elections and who they've chosen to be leaders of committees and different parts of the USCCB, they've kind of gone a centrist route, if you will. They're not going towards the polarized extremes of more progressive or more conservatives. They're choosing people who can work, if you will, across the aisle. We hate to use political terms, but but that's basically what they're doing, and to help bring people together. So that's very much worth the read, and I'm going to pitch one more, and then we're going to conclude this segment. But the other story that we've been talking about that Jonathan wrote in News Analysis is synodality requires conversion of heart more than new structures, U.S. bishops say. So that's at ncregister.com. And you can find both of those stories and more CNA stories as well that just talk about the specifics of this last meeting, which included the cause of canonization for 2 American women. So that's worth learning about. But Jonathan, Matthew, Shannon, thank you for bringing to us the important discussions of our bishops.
A pleasure. Thank you, Jeanette.
You've been listening to Register Radio on EWTN Radio. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the U.S. elections with Shannon Mullen. Stay tuned for Register Radio on EWTN.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, host of Register Radio, together with my co-host Matthew Bunson, EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director. And Shannon Mullen, Editor-in-Chief of the Register, has stayed on with us to talk about the U.S. elections. Shannon, we've seen, what have we seen, I guess, in the last 2 weeks after the election? I mean, it just feels like it is going very fast-paced. So how's the mood? What do you think? What do you see?
I think the mood right now is one of great expectations and great dread on the other side. But I think this phase has been also very fascinating, and just how it's unfolded. It's kind of been great public theater, the way that Donald Trump has rolled out his picks for his cabinet posts, which include many Catholics, actually. So some interesting choices there. He's also laid out these videos, these very concise. Our social media team would really give him kudos on this. These very short, maybe 90-second policy videos that lay out very specific things about his policies, what his 10 things that he's going to do about education and so forth. So all this is happening online in real time. People are reacting to it. So it's been very fascinating, I guess is the word to watch.
And just as fascinating has been the reaction to these announcements. We seem to have, in the wake of the election, what seems now a very long time ago already, doesn't it? It's just, 10 days ago or however long, 14 days. Anyway, the reaction to the election included many a meltdown on social media. And now as the cabinet picks are rolling out, we're seeing a new, fresh wave of meltdowns, especially when you toss in names like Matt Gaetz. We'll talk more about him in a second. Tulsi Gabbard, and now, of course, RFK Jr., who's going to be nominated as head of the HHS, or Health and Human Services. So let's go back just a second, though, Shannon, to the Democrats, because there's a lot, it seems to me, of recrimination, a lot of finger-pointing, and anger at this point.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about, hey, the Democratic Party needs to look at itself in the mirror and really reevaluate what it stands for, why it's not connecting with working-class Americans. That was a big theme. There needs to be a course correction. I don't see it happening, honestly. Right. I don't. If the mainstream media outlets, what we've seen on MSNBC and places like that, is any indication, there is this. I don't know. It's maybe a little bit about the stages of grief. We're in the the denial and then the anger, and let's see what happens after that. But it was just a devastating loss for the Democrats, and I I'm not seeing any real movement to change, to course correct.
Right. So let's take a look at Trump's cabinet. You were mentioning that he has begun rolling out the names. Who's jumped out at you? And you just mentioned, too, that there are some notable Catholics.
There really are. Of course, Marco Rubio, the Florida senator, is his pick for Secretary of State. That's really the most prominent pick. Elise Stefanik, the New York Congresswoman, is his pick for UN ambassador. Tom Homan, another Catholic, is the designated border czar. The tough cop approach that signals. Also, John Ratcliffe for CIA. He's a Texas congressman. He's a Notre Dame grad. And then, as you mentioned, RFK. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
He has a lot to say about his Catholic faith.
Now, he has come out publicly against transgender surgeries for minors, but he does seem to have something of a track record on abortion that is setting off some alarms with pro-life groups. Would that be fair?
It is. I don't see it. His very strong views on Make America Healthy Again, on really going after big pharma, big agriculture. I think those sort of, and then of course his stance towards vaccines. I think that sort of takes all the oxygen out of the room. Yes, he's jumped all over the place. He does describe himself as pro-choice, but maybe kind of of another generation that the Bill Clinton generation, maybe that saw every abortion as a tragedy. So that's not, I don't think, a real priority for him. It's certainly not for the Trump administration. So while I think pro-life groups can certainly take a lot of issue with his views on abortion, I don't think that's part of his agenda.
And one of the points that's made immediately is that this would be, he's an implementer of policy. And I think it's safe to say that whatever abortion policy is going to be pretty radically different from what we would have expected from a Kamala Harris administration.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest, maybe the most excitement, maybe if that's the word that I see among Trump supporters, is of the Doge, the
yes,
the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's. Basically, it's not a department, right? But it's a government efficiency effort. It's supposed to sunset in 2 years once, and it's supposed to identify trillions of dollars in savings. There's a lot of attention on that as a sort of generational opportunity to really reset the government. And there's a lot of Catholic themes in there. I mean, the whole idea of subsidiarity, of limited government. We're a long way from limited government in this country, but there are some interesting Catholic themes there.
Yeah, and we were just talking with Jonathan Liedl, fresh from the USCCB, where we all were, and immigration from a Catholic standpoint looks like this is going to be one of the big issues for this administration. Tom Homan, as we were just noting, is a Catholic. How much conflict do you see in the months and years ahead if the administration does proceed with its plan of at least what's being described as mass deportations?
Yeah, it's, as we mentioned, on paper, in the abstract, Americans, and I assume mainstream Catholic voters also, are very supportive of a crackdown on illegal immigration. How that will change when we start to see, I don't know, will we see raids? Will we see, families separated? Will we see people being housed in detention centers at the border? So the visuals are going to be very tough. The Trump administration realizes that. They certainly sound like they have a very unblinking, determined resolve, to go through with that. But we'll see what happens. The other, briefly, just to touch on, yes, that is definitely going to be a conflict point, a tension point with the bishops. There's also a major common ground point that's not getting a lot of attention, which is school choice.
Right.
So, Trump, among other things, has called for the elimination of the Department of Education, which really doesn't, on the local level, I know because I've sat through hundreds of local school board meetings in my past life in New Jersey. The federal government really doesn't play a huge role, at the local level for schools, but he's talking about eliminating that. He's all in on school choice. So that's not getting a lot of attention now, but that's something that the Register really is going to be following very, very closely.
Absolutely. And, we didn't talk about what happened with ballot initiatives and things like that, but there's one thing I really wanted to point out from the election, and that is that assisted suicide was kept at bay in one state, and that was West Virginia. And I bring that up because I think we also need to kind of look at these issues like that one. That is not getting a lot of attention, but actually was kept at bay. So just to mention that. And there's a ton more news and analysis and commentary about the election, about the U.S. Bishops meeting at the ncregister.com and in the upcoming print edition. So we invite you to subscribe to that. Thanks for joining us here on Register Radio, here on EWTN. Until next week, on behalf of my producer, Michael McCall, and myself and Matthew Bunson, I pray that God bless you.